I'm the Director of Visa Australia here, and I'll be the person giving the seminar today. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to you and hope that the information that we give is helpful. So the topic of discussion today is COVID-19 and the Australian Migration Program. So what we're going to be talking about today is the Skilled Visa Program, and just to put that in context, the main ways that people migrate to Australia now are through the Skilled Visa Program. It's the heart of the Australian Migration Program, and it allows people who have qualifications and work experience that's in demand in Australia to migrate to Australia independently. In addition to the Skilled Visa Program, employers or Australian companies can sponsor people for temporary but also permanent work visas. And then in some cases, if you have a family member already living in Australia, for example, as an Australian partner, well, he or she can sponsor you for a permanent visa as well. Outside of that, there's a range of other temporary work visas that we won't be discussing today, and then also asylum visas that we won't be discussing today. So the main focus of the discussion today will be on the Skilled Visa Program. Okay, well, let's get started, eh? So these are the general requirements to migrate to Australia. There's 5 legal requirements that you need to meet. It's a legal process to apply for any kind of Australian visa. The legislation underpinning the visa program is quite detailed, and you have to meet the law and establish that in the evidence that you include with your application. The Department of Immigration functions as the judge, and it is the department's job to assess whether your application meets the legal criteria and to either grant or to refuse to grant your visa. Okay, so for the Skilled Visa Program, there are 5 requirements. First of all, age. You have to be under 45 years old to be eligible to apply for a skilled visa and migrate. Secondly, you need to have qualifications that are relevant to an occupation that's in demand in Australia. And I'll come back and talk about that in more detail in a moment. Thirdly, you need to have a reasonable level of English, and that is English that would enable you essentially to work in your occupation in Australia. Okay, so the seminar is in English, and I assume that people all have that threshold level of English that you would need to be able to migrate. There's different tests that you can take and that you will need to take to establish your level of English. And it's for people from non-English speaking backgrounds, it's one of the more challenging parts of the visa program. Okay, the 4th requirement now is state nomination, and that is a separate application made to one of the Australian state governments, and I'll speak about that as well in a moment. And finally, there's a visa points test, and you get points allocated for your age, for the number of years of work experience that you have, your level of English, whether you've studied in Australia, your civil status and your partner, and a number of other factors. And to be eligible for the visa, you need to score 65 points on the visa points test. Okay, so that is in general the requirements to migrate. I want to go back to the issue of qualifications now and state nomination, because these are the critical factors in the way that the current migration system is working. So in terms of qualifications, in fact, you need to be accredited in an occupation that's in demand in Australia. So first, the demand. There's different lists of occupations and you need to have an occupation on one of those lists. So the federal government, the Australian federal government, the Commonwealth government, which is the main national government, has a list of occupations in demand all over Australia. There's about 180 occupations on that federal government's list. Most of those occupations are specialised or technical. So it's occupations like engineers, computer professionals, actuaries, accountants, architects, construction project managers, many health-related occupations, nurses, psychologists, medical practitioners, social workers. And then in addition, there's a lot of trades occupations, plumbers, carpenters, welders, chefs, and football players, curiously enough. So to apply for the visa, you need to have an occupation on that main list, or alternatively, each state government also has a list of occupations in demand in Australia, and there are more than 400 occupations on those state government lists. That reflects the fact that there's a demand for workers in particular regions that's different to other regions in Australia. So state governments can actually allocate and identify occupations that are in demand and then nominate people for the skilled visa. So what nomination does, it essentially allows more people to apply for a skilled visa with the support of the state government. It also gives you additional points on the visa points test. But the main thing it does now is actually trigger an automatic invitation to apply for the visa. So the issue is that you can't just apply for a visa now, you have to be invited to apply. And to be invited to apply, there's invitation rounds every 3 months, and you need an occupation on the federal government's list, and you need at least 95 points in the visa points test. So the way it's working now is that there are very few invitations being issued, and it's very difficult to secure an invitation to apply for a visa. And what that means is that everyone, just about everyone, has to apply for state nomination. And the reason for that is to access the automatic invitation to apply for the visa that comes with state nomination. Okay, so state nomination. Different states have different policies about who they will nominate. In some cases, state governments are nominating people who have studied in the state for a period of time. So, for example, South Australia and Tasmania will nominate people who have studied in Australia for 12 months. There's some other rules associated with that. But basically, if you are accredited in an occupation in demand in Australia and pass the visa points test, have the correct level of English, and study in the state for 12 months, you can apply for nomination and then secure the invitation to apply for the skilled visa. Okay, so that then creates a link between applying to migrate and then studying in Australia. And so I will talk a little bit more about that particular link later in the presentation. Okay, well, in saying that, historically, there's always been, well, not historically, but recently there's two ways that you can migrate to Australia. So you can apply if you're eligible from outside Australia, and you can apply directly for a permanent visa from outside Australia. You need to meet these criteria, the 5 criteria, and the visa will be granted. It takes perhaps 12 to 18 months to finish that criteria, and you'll be granted the visa. The other way then is to come to Australia to study. So in some cases you can study for 12 months, in other cases it'll be 2 years that you need to study. So the legal requirements are exactly the same, whether you apply directly for the visa from outside Australia or whether you have to come to study. Obviously it's preferable if you can apply directly without the expense of studying, but it is increasingly necessary to in fact come here on a student visa before being able to apply for the skilled visa and migrate. Okay, well, we'll move on now to the process of applying. And we've just said, if you can see, we've said that it takes on average 12 months to complete the visa process, but with COVID-19, timeframes have become less predictable, and in fact it may be longer than that 12-month period of time. But essentially what you need to do is the things that are set out in this slide. Each process may well have different variations on what you need to do, but all of these things need to happen. So first of all, you need to understand whether you're eligible, and that involves an assessment with a migration agent or a migration lawyer, or with someone who knows what they're talking about. You need to have a look to see whether you can be accredited, what the rules are for your occupation, whether you can be nominated and what the implications of that are, what level of English you need, and whether you pass the visa points test. In addition, there's other issues that can come into play. Police check, if you've committed criminal offences, then that can be an issue, or health issues as well. So the first step is that assessment. The second is the skills assessment, which is the accreditation process. So different occupations have different accrediting bodies, and the different accrediting bodies have different rules. You need to make sure that you can be accredited by your accrediting body related to your occupation. The third step is the points test. You need to be certain that you pass the points test and have enough points to actually apply for the visa. The fourth step, English. So obviously non-English speakers, and in fact everyone, even the English. I always quite enjoy telling the people from England that they have to take an English language test, even though they invented the language. But everyone has to take the English language test. So, and it's all progressive. So once you've been accredited and passed the English language test, you can then apply for state nomination. To do that, you need to meet the state nomination requirements. Okay, the sixth step then is to actually make the visa application. So you've been accredited, passed the English test and nominated, then the next step is to apply for the visa. You need to pay the Australian government the fee associated with that application, and it can be quite expensive. For a single person, it's about $4,000. For a couple, it's about $6,000, and this is money that you pay to the Australian government. And for a family, it can be $8,000 or $9,000 that you pay at the time that you apply for the visa. Okay, the final step will be then a medical examination. They're worried about tuberculosis and other conditions that would be expensive to treat in the Australian public health system, and then also a police clearance. Obviously, Australian government doesn't want to allow people who have significant criminal history into Australia through the skilled visa process. Yeah. Okay, so that's the process of applying for the visa, and it's the same whether you are applying for the visa from offshore or after having completed studies in Australia. Okay, well, we will now move on to a discussion of the impact of coronavirus on the Australian visa system. So effectively, yeah, we're incredibly lucky in Australia in that COVID has been effectively eradicated. To start with, we had cases, and it became increasingly likely that it would get out of control. But there was a fairly severe lockdown by the Australian government, and combined with basically with the closure of the international border, we were able to get control of the virus. And in effect, there's no more community transmission, and we're very privileged to have returned to our normal lives. Basically, the Australian government is now unrolling the vaccine program. It started to do that, and in addition, it's being very careful who it lets into the country. Okay, so the issue is that the border was closed in March 2020, and in addition, people had to go into quarantine for 14 days. So it has really, in effect, closed off the ability of people to move to Australia. International students, temporary visa holders, visitors basically have not been able to enter Australia, and in effect that's been one of the key policies that's resulted in the good situation that we have now with COVID-19. In terms of the reopening of the border, initially the government said that it would be looking at reopening in July 2022, but in fact we can't necessarily see that happening, and the reason for that is that I think the Australian government's going to wait to see what happens with the Australian vaccine program, but also with what's happening with vaccine programs overseas. I mean, is it going to work? Will it stop people transmitting the infection? Will they get the vaccine passport organised? You know, there's quite a bit of uncertainty surrounding that. The other thing is quarantine, because there has been some escapes from quarantine of the virus. So it's not a foolproof system, and they're still working on better infrastructure and a better way of organising practical quarantine. So what that means is that it's unlikely that the border will open, we think, to international students. So that is to the hundreds of thousands of people that would be coming in to study, also to visit Australia until January or early 2022. Okay, so that is what's happening with the border. In terms of the migration program, when COVID hit, the Australian government, in recognising the importance of migration to the Australian economy and also to Australian society, um, decided not to cut the intake. So it left the permanent visa program at the same number of places as it has been for the last couple of years, at 160,000 places. But what it did do was actually reduce the number of places available to skilled immigrants. Okay, so that's people who are looking to migrate to Australia independently, either from outside Australia or after having studied here. Okay, so these are the numbers for the current financial year, and that ends in June 2021. So we've got another 5 months of this financial year, or 4 months of this financial year. And at that point, then the Australian government will announce new numbers. So it'll announce new numbers overall, but also numbers for the skilled visa process. And what will happen, we're hoping that there will be a bigger allocation to skilled migration, and then what the Australian government will reallocate nomination places to the state governments, and then the state governments will start doing their job of issuing the nominations again. And we're hoping that there will be a return to a big Australia and a return to better options for people looking to migrate. At the moment, just with the way that the system's working, you can't apply for migration or a skilled visa from outside Australia. So that pathway has been temporarily closed down, but they are still processing visa applications for people who are already in Australia. Okay, so the migration program, the skilled visa program, is still in business. It's slowed down, but people are still applying for and being granted skilled visas, but people who are already in Australia on other kinds of visas. Okay, well, this brings us along to the next point in the discussion. So I'll just review what we've spoken about, which is the legal requirements for applying for the visa. So you've got to be under 45, have good English, be accredited in an occupation that's in demand, nominated by a state government, pass the visa points test. We've also spoken about the process, noting that it can be a slow process that might take a year or a couple of years, and also might involve coming to Australia to study on a student visa. Okay. I now want to talk about a little bit more closely about the student visa and the possibility of studying to migrate. Okay, so effectively, to speak frankly, which I'm sure you'd appreciate, just before COVID hit, there was probably about 650,000 international students in Australia, and international education is considered an export industry, and it is incredibly profitable. International education was producing 39 billion, that is $1 billion of income to Australia every year. And the Australian government is very concerned to reopen the border as soon as it can to re-access that revenue stream. It also sees itself in competition with other countries that provide international education. So that would be the Canadians, the United States, the New Zealanders, the United Kingdom, and other countries as well. And to assist Australia in that competition, it has some policies that are favourable and helpful for international students. So in the first place, on a student visa, you can work 20 hours a week and full-time in course vacations. If you study a master's level course and have a partner, your partner can work full-time. So in effect, it's a backdoor work visa for the partner of a master's level student. The other thing it does is, if you study a university level course, including a master's or undergraduate course, you can then apply for a graduate visa. So the graduate visa is a 2-year work visa that allows you to work for a further 2 years after completing your studies. In some cases, it can be a 3-year visa, in other cases, a 4-year visa, and you can apply for an extension of an additional year at the end of that first graduate visa. So that means the proposition of coming to Australia to study for a master's, a 2-year master's, for example, is in fact a 5-year proposition. For 2 years, you're studying, can work part-time. If you have a partner, they can work full-time. For the second period, 3 years, you can both work full-time. And the idea is in that time, you will then meet the requirements for the skilled visa, hit the level of English that you need, be accredited in an occupation that's in demand in Australia, and then obtain the state nomination and apply for the visa. So when we refer to study to migrate, that is what we're talking about. We're talking about people who come well informed, but with a deliberate intention of studying a course that will open the door to applying for the skilled visa. So there's a couple of issues with that. So first of all, not all courses allow you to migrate or to apply for a graduate visa. So there's a certain set of rules about what you would need to study to best facilitate your migration journey. The other question is where to study. So the Australian government is encouraging international students to move to regional Australia. And there's various definitions of what regional Australia is. For example, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go and study out in the outback, because Adelaide, Canberra, the national capital, Hobart, Perth are all considered regions for that definition. Okay, so there's an issue of what to study, and that has to be assessed based on what you've already studied and whether you can be accredited in an occupation based on your existing qualifications and employment experience, and also where to study. And that would then be part of the assessment that we would do to get things started with you. Okay, so this is the issues for that assessment. And I would just note this applies equally whether you're outside Australia, considering whether you want to come to study and considering the whole package of information that you need to make these decisions, but also for people that are inside Australia. That's a terrible thing. Yeah, because in many cases people use the service of an education agent to apply for courses that are perfectly useless for facilitating the later application for a skilled visa. Education agents aren't migration agents, and they're paid a commission for referring you to a particular course, and it's not their concern that that course will later allow you to apply for a skilled visa or not. They've taken the commission they've run, and you are in Australia now trying to understand what the issues are and what changes you'd need to make to your visa strategy to in fact have a visa strategy that is a skilled visa or a migration strategy. So that's the first thing. You need to check your eligibility, and it's reasonably complex because there's a number of different things that need to be assessed. The second thing is if you can be accredited, then that is a major shortcut, and it means that it opens the door to a far wider range of courses once you start studying in Australia. The third thing is improve your English. So at the moment, we're providing advice to people. If you're outside Australia, we're suggesting that we wait until September to review the situation, so September 2021, because at that point it will be clearer when the border's going to open, but also it'll be clearer what state nomination policies are in place that would actually cause us to recommend that you go to South Australia, for example, as opposed to the Northern Territory, as opposed to regional New South Wales or Sydney, perhaps. So we're just waiting for a little bit more clarification on those policies to actually give people firm advice on what to study and also where in Australia. But that doesn't mean that you can't start work on your accreditation process now, because that is based on your existing qualifications and existing work experience. And of course, people need to continue the effort of improving their English and reaching the score that you need on one of the English language exams. Okay, so that is the recommendation that we're giving to people who are outside Australia. And if you're already in Australia, then it'll be slightly different because we'll immediately be looking at those accreditation issues, but also the course issues and what course would you need to do reflecting your circumstances to get your skilled visa process moving. Okay, well look, that is the heart of the presentation. and the information that we have for you today, which was a basic restatement of the requirements of the skilled visa process, the process of applying, and also the relationship with coming to Australia to study, and why in many cases it is now part of the process of migrating that you need to spend some time here on a student visa first. In relation to the student visa, at Visa Australia, we are enormous supporters of education. We love education. We won't hear a bad word said about it. But in fact, our major concern is to get people a visa and to facilitate the migration program. So if we can identify a shorter course or a less expensive course, that is the course that we will recommend. And it's all driven by the migration law and migration policy, and it's not driven by educational outcomes, because that's not our concern. Of course, we'll be looking to recommend a course that you're interested in that will facilitate better employment options and higher salaries. But our main concern is that you do a course that will then allow you to migrate. Okay, so Visa Australia, we're lawyers and also migration agents. We've now worked in this area for actually about 17 years. So we've seen a lot of changes to the visa program. A lot of different policies have come and gone in that time. And we've continued to work with our clients to the best of our ability to help people achieve the dream in some cases, or the practical reality of obtaining Australian permanent residence and then citizenship. In terms of our work, we've got a 98% success rate for visa applications. And I'll just be very frank about this. That is a true percentage. But a lot of the issues happen before you can and need to be resolved before you apply for the visa. And we're talking about the accreditation process, and that is a little bit fraught, which means that there's some uncertainty there with the accrediting bodies. The other point of risk is English language. Obviously, you need the level that you need to be successful. And then the third point is with the state nomination process. And there has been a lot of changes at that level in the last couple of years, and that is quite a difficult challenge, that you have to be aware that policy can change, and that can affect your visa process. But once we get to the point of applying for the visa, then you can be fairly certain, 98% certain, that you will get the visa. Okay, so we work under a code of conduct registered with the Australian government, and we have our main office is in Canberra, but a lot of our work is done virtually now, and we have representation in Mexico. Okay, more practically, the first thing that we need to do is have the legal assessment. Okay, and that is, we would like the opportunity to think more carefully about your situation and to consider what your strategy might be, to answer your questions, to confirm your strategy, and to make recommendations to you. So that is what we mean by the formal legal assessment. And they're done over Skype, or you're welcome to come to the office in Canberra if you'd like to do it in person. And at the end of the interview, we then provide a confirmation in writing. We include links to different websites so that you can continue with your research, and we give a quote for the process of migrating. How do you book your consultation? Well, you go to the Visa Australia website, and there's a book a consultation calendar, and that allows you to pick a time that's convenient to you, whatever your time zone, and there's also office hours here. There's a fee. It is $350 for the assessment, but I believe we'll send you a code for a discount code of that fee for the privilege that you've had in attending this seminar. Okay, well then that is the seminar, and I'd like to say that I hope that you found it helpful. We've gone through the sort of the guts of the issues with applying for the visa program. You know, I mean, I appreciate that some people may not have thought about it a lot, but we also would have people who are fairly expert in the way that the system works and looking for final clarification of a particular point. Either way, you're welcome to organise a time to meet with us and to have the assessment and to get to the bottom of that. Done thousands of these interviews now, and while I haven't seen everything, I've seen a lot. Well, there's always surprises in migration, but yeah, would yeah, encourage you to take that first step and get in touch with us. Yeah. Okay. Well, look, I think that's it now. Thank you again for your attendance at the interview. I hope you found it helpful. Please feel free to get in touch with us, and we look forward to meeting you and providing the advice that we hope would facilitate the change in your life at the end of the day. So look, my name's Nick Houston. I'm the Director of Visa Australia. Thanks for your time, and we look forward to meeting you. Bye.